Hello and welcome to Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. I'm John Molesky. Today, we welcome back an old friend. Our guest is Jane Harman, a distinguished fellow and president emerita of the Woodrow Wilson Center. She served 9 terms as a member of Congress from California and was ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee. Jane joins us today to discuss her new book, Insanity Defense: Why Our Failure to Confront Hard National Security Problems Makes Us Less Safe. It hits bookshelves on May 18th. Jane, welcome back. Great to see you.
Thank you, John. This is my second Wilson Center Now in the same calendar year. Do I get a trophy?
Yeah, well, we'll work on it. We might show a prize that you got. Let's do it right now. What the hell?
All
Up
right.
front.
Here
Here's one of Jane's going away presents after she left the Wilson Center. Our superhero for 10 years. There it is.
See the base? It's so cool. One of the best presents ever. A true likeness of me, all I can say, including my cape. I love it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
We may ask you to fly before the interview is over.
Be careful what you wish for.
Jane, let me ask you, you've been in this game for a long time. And as you mentioned in interviews and in the book, you were many times in the room where it happens. So why did you decide to write this book now?
Well, I actually wanted to write it when I left Congress. The problem with that was I was starting a big new job called the Wilson Center, and there was absolutely no time to do it. It also turned out to be better timing now for 2 reasons. Number one, we're a decade later and more mistakes have been made, including mine. And number two, the only thing I can say good about this god-awful quarantine is that I was alone in my house for long periods of time and I could actually write this book. There was no way I could do it earlier. So that's why. And it covers 3 decades, and I'm sure we'll talk about them. But I was in many of the rooms where it happened. And I hope that in our 4th decade after the end of the Cold War, we will do a lot better.
I'm wondering, many times you introduce yourself as a recovering politician. Is this book part of your recovery? Was there something therapeutic about getting this all on paper?
Oh, you bet. Therapeutic, but also maybe wistful, because I look back at opportunities missed and I look forward at opportunities I hope won't be missed. I'm not there, but I hope they won't be missed. But events of the last several days, especially the Liz Cheney chapter, are not very encouraging.
So there's an old adage about the Pentagon fighting the last war, and you mentioned in the book about still being in a Cold War mindset. When you step back from it, why is it that we don't seem to learn the lessons that are readily available to us?
Well, I actually think some people learn them, and those people are in the Pentagon, some of them, and they're in Congress, some of them, and they're at the Wilson Center, imagine, and around. But the processes of government in particular are glue-like, and changing anything is incredibly hard. Not just changing things in the executive branch, but changing the committee structure in Congress. I discussed that. And I think we still have a 19th century committee structure in Congress, despite adding a few little things here and there. And I think that the Pentagon fights the last war because it builds the equipment for the last war, and it has various offices organized around procuring and building that equipment. And Congress has committees that mirror those offices. And so you end up with a whole bunch of people in what I call the widget protection business. And I was one of those people. I admit that in the book.
Well, you're very honest in the book. And also one of the great things about it is that you don't just identify problems, but as the one you just mentioned now, you also talk about possible solutions.
I do. But they will require people working together, bipartisanship, which is about the dirtiest word in the English language, or at least the American English language at the moment, and wanting to solve problems rather than just blame other people for not solving them.
When we look at the withdrawal from Afghanistan as sort of a case study in national security decision-making, is that a sign to you that we're learning from the past, or is this the same old, same old?
I actually think it's a sign that we have learned something from the past. The problem with Afghanistan, again, as I state in the book and have stated since, and when I finished the book, we had Donald Trump negotiating with the Taliban an exit date of May 1, but we didn't have a more nuanced policy that we now have. in the Obama administration. I think the problem with Afghanistan is we did the right thing for a period of time, but we didn't ask ourselves the question that Dave Petraeus always asked. Dave Petraeus, the former vaunted general who was in the Afghan, had the Afghan mission a couple of times and every other mission in the Middle East, and was the head of Central Command, and then was the head of the CIA, and now is co-chair of the Global Advisory Council to the Wilson Center. But Dave's question, which I always have asked myself since he asked it to me, is how will this end? And we didn't answer that. We didn't ask or answer that after we accomplished the short-term mission of degrading and decapitating those who came after us on 9/11. And we stayed, and mission creep set in. That's a typical problem with our government. And then there we were, propping up a military which isn't very good at fighting wars, propping up a government which isn't very good at running a country, putting up with rampant corruption. We actually participated a bit, I think, in providing payments to some of the warlords in the early years. And here we are 2 decades later. So yes, I applaud a change in strategy. This is exactly what I think we should be doing, in spite of the fact that it is going to lead for sure to some short-term games by the Taliban. I don't know exactly what will happen with the government, but I think it's the least bad option.
It's almost as if it's where the Petraeus question meets the Powell doctrine of if you break it, you own it.
Good point. I didn't have that in the book. That's in your book, John. When are you writing?
That's in the new edition when the paperback comes out. So, Jane, you write about successes and failures over the course of 3 decades, and some of which you were intimately involved in. We don't want to give away anything because we really do want people to read your excellent book. But I wonder if you would identify maybe one success and one failure that you find most defining in terms of what you're writing about.
Well, let's see. One, that's hard, but I think one success was Congress rising to the occasion. It's not an oxymoron. Congress rising to the occasion on a virtually unanimous basis after we were surprised on 9/11 and authorizing the use of military force in Afghanistan and against the groups that attacked us. That's a success. That was the right thing to do, and we went in and accomplished the mission. Mistake. We stayed too long. We've already discussed that. But while we stayed too long, we also didn't have a plan for the people we detained. We didn't have an interrogation plan. And we surely, at least it seems to me, over-militarized virtually everything we did after 9/11. And so what's a specific mistake? I would say setting up Guantanamo Bay Prison in Cuba. And we do own that. We rent. It's a strange relationship we've had for 100 years. But we rent a little portion of Cuba from the Cubans, and we're sent and we send. I guess we send our check every year, and it's put in somebody's desk. But it's a very strange agreement, and we use that little area for drug enforcement in the Caribbean. But all of a sudden, we decided we would have a prison for these detainees there because we didn't know where to put them. And initially the prison was basically chicken wire. And it looked like cages. And I was there 4 times. But the first time, which I describe in the book, so this is my failure, was going in the launch from the airport, the landing strip where you land, to the prison, which is on a different, it sort of juts out into different areas. You have to go over water. And I asked the Army 3-star who was taking a small group of us there on a congressional trip, why is this prison here? And he said, without blinking, to be beyond the reach of US law. Just inhale that for a moment. Here I am, Harvard Law School product. I knew better. I knew better. I knew that we couldn't detain in a US prison and not have US law apply. What did I do? Nothing. Why did I do nothing? Because I thought maybe there's some information I don't have. And secondly, it was right after 9/11. And I thought, oh my goodness, we could be attacked again. Maybe there's an emergency issue here again that I'm not informed about. 5 years later, the Supreme Court decided just what I said, that the prison wasn't beyond the reach of US law. And we've been playing sort of catch up on our back feet ever since. And we still have 40 or so people we can't try because the evidence is tainted, because so-called enhanced interrogation methods were used on them. And we can't move because there's resistance to moving them to federal, even supermax prisons in the US, and who are in a limbo status. And that is a big black eye for America. And I sketch out some ideas for how to solve that. But nonetheless, I was there when that happened.
Your honesty in the book is I mentioned it earlier. It's compelling. It's come up in other interviews. And I want to mention two excellent interviews for people to watch, in addition to this one that we're doing today. One with David Ignatius for Washington Post Live, which is available online, and then one right here at the Wilson Center that you did with David Sanger. Also terrific discussions of your book. Jane, you mentioned what I'm going to interpret it as sort of the rule of unintended consequences. With the benefit of hindsight, you could look back and question what you did or didn't do, and then where it ended up. You mentioned the authorization to use military force. You provide a startling number in regard to that decision that was made by Congress with only one dissenting vote. 40 military actions in 19 countries, which clearly weren't covered under the initial legislation.
Well, I just published an op-ed in The Hill this week about that. And I make a couple of additional points since you mentioned it, which are that, in my view, the authorization to use military force, the 2001 authorization to use military force, which is still it threadbare as it is in place, has just been canceled. That's our new word in our culture. Canceled by the Biden decision to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. I mean, we were authorized to do a military mission. We're ending it. So the authorization should therefore end. And it is time for Congress to step up and decide whether to authorize the use of military force in other military missions, which it hasn't done. It provides the funds, but it doesn't authorize the missions. The other thing that's in limbo, since you used that word, is the status of the prisoners at Gitmo. As I mentioned, there are only 40 left, but they were so-called enemy combatants, people rounded up in connection with 9/11 and our action in Afghanistan. Well, our action in Afghanistan is over. So what are these people? And what I propose, and it's in the book too, is that Congress, hello, Congress, please work together. Please solve some of these hard problems, make us safer. That Congress enact a doctrine of preventive detention. In other words, a process for detaining people we haven't tried and reviewing their detention. And I spell it out in some detail, and it's also in this op-ed that was just published 2 days ago in The Hill.
In a previous discussion, you told me that the great title for the book was a title recommended by your daughter. Another great title is a chapter heading, Power Over Truth Corrupts Intelligence. Terrific title. Explain that concept.
Okay, well, a few more credits to my daughter. I had a boring title picked out. I won't even bore you with it because you might fall asleep in the middle of this interview. And this is my number 4 child, who is a writer and creates podcasts and is quite clever, very clever, Jane Harman. She said, "Mother, that is so boring." The right title is Insanity Defense. And bingo, I never would have thought of it. So the other title, I'm not sure how we came up with that, but it's a play on speaking truth to power. That is the role of the intelligence agencies. We have a number of those agencies. You may ask me about that in a minute. But in the Great Hall of the CIA, where there is this wall of honor with just little stars for CIA people who have died in conflict. And some of those names are not even disclosed now because our missions would be compromised. It's a really stunning place. And I find it as moving as any memorial I've seen. But anyway, in the middle of that, there is I can't remember if it's a statue or what, but it says, "And the truth shall set ye free." And that is what intelligence is supposed to do. It's supposed to speak truth to power. And intelligence, as I say in the book, is not a science. It's a set of predictions based on our best estimates of intentions and capability. And we get those estimates through human intelligence, but also through a variety of so-called technical means. You can imagine what they are, but never mind, don't ask me. And that's how we try to discern what will happen. And if you corrupt that, if you cherry pick the intel, or you tell the intelligence community, only tell me this kind of news, or you remove those who are most professional and replace them with political hacks, then you do what the title of that chapter says.
Another distinction I've heard you made, which illustrates the importance of language in changing everything of how we think about a thing, is you've talked about America not as the indispensable nation, but as the indispensable partner. Can you explain to our viewers what you mean by that?
Well, the Wilson Center understands that to its core. I mean, Woodrow Wilson was a complicated man. We're all learning more about his record on race and even his record on women, but he was a visionary in international affairs. And he got it. He got it first, I think. America is the indispensable partner, building alliances in the world, creating international institutions, starting with the League of Nations, which never materialized as he intended. And in fact, he died fighting to set it up. But at any rate, I think we somehow, that hubris set in after we won the Cold War. We won and Russia lost. That's how we saw it. That set up a whole, it set up this whole grievance issue that Vladimir Putin has against the US. And it was different from the lesson we learned after World War II, where we won, but then we helped Germany and Japan recover. So let's understand, this was a zero-sum game at the end of the Cold War. We thought that we would be the sole superpower in the world, and everybody would want to be us because we won. Well, guess what? In the decade of the 90s, and that's when I came to Congress in the first post-Cold War class, we missed the rise of China, something we understand very well at the Wilson Center, and we missed the fact that China did not want to be us. We also missed the rise. We saw a bit of it, but we didn't focus on it as a major threat. We missed the rise of terrorism, and we missed the fact that a whole bunch of people not only didn't want to be us, they wanted to take us down. So huge mistake. And now we have a chance, especially in this administration, which wants to restore soft power and wants to restore alliances and wants to build back better, to project ourselves as the indispensable partner. And as far as I'm concerned, that starts with so-called vaccine diplomacy. It is really incumbent on America to do everything we can to get vaccines delivered to arms around the world, especially in places that have no other options.
You mentioned your friend and colleague, David Petraeus, and I believe you were the creator of a session that he does with board and council members at the Wilson Center under the banner of What Keeps You Up at Night, along with John Scarlett, I believe, as well. I'm wondering about you. What keeps you up at night as you look at what would be the next chapters of a book that could be written continually because there are always new threats popping up? What are the things that you think we should be focusing on that keeps one eye open in the middle of the night?
My third eye. Well, I think that we do need to refocus our very legacy-centric defense and national security apparatus on current and future threats. We already fought World War II, and we already fought Vietnam, for better or worse, and we won the Cold War. So now what? Current and future threats are much more technology-based, and the number one threat right now is cybersecurity, both ransomware attacks and other cyber attacks. And if we didn't know that before, let's just think about half of the fuel supply of the United States being interrupted in the last week. David Sanger, whom you mentioned, wrote a brilliant book at the Wilson Center, entitled The Perfect Weapon, to describe cyber. And he has covered all these issues for the New York Times forever, and he speaks English in describing technical material. He starts with Stuxnet, which was the way we hobbled the centrifuge capacity of Iran for a period. And it's, we do it, they do it, but figuring out both how to prevent it, which we haven't figured out, and how in the best possible way to respond to it are still hard problems. And also maybe, just maybe, we have we had a nuclear weapons regime in the world. It's a little shabby at the moment, but we need a cybersecurity regime in the world so that no one crosses red lines to incapacitate another country.
Jane, ultimately, your book, your reflections, your recommendations lead to the question of how do you construct a national defense policy for the 21st century? And I know this is almost an unfair question, but I'm wondering, it's almost like, the Golden Fleece or the Ark of the Covenant. It seems out of reach. What's preventing it? How do we get there?
Well, we have something called a national security strategy. And actually, the Trump administration under Jim Mattis, who was, I think, a superb Secretary of Defense, and who I was honored. I was extremely honored when he spoke, among others, at my 20-hour farewell event at the Wilson Center. Somebody quipped that my funeral won't be that good, and since I won't be there for my funeral, I'll take this. But anyway, Mattis's national security strategy, also H.R. McMaster, who was for a time in the national security advisor in the Trump White House, both of them, sadly, were removed. Well, Mattis resigned. I think McMaster was fired, but crafted a national security strategy, which said that counterterrorism has to remain a U.S. goal. But, oh, by the way, Russia and China have risen and are, probably our most important national security threats. And I think that's accurate. And I think a lot of the language in the strategy is accurate. And recently, Secretary of State Tony Blinken released an interim national security strategy for the Biden administration, which doesn't dispute those conclusions, but adds something which I think is dead on, which is that we have to, in addition, focus on domestic threats, which are domestic terrorism. Obviously, we're seeing that, climate, and pandemics. And why I am so bullish on this approach is that it, as I say, takes the foreign out of foreign policy, makes foreign policy relevant to average Americans. And that's the only way going forward that we can really use our leverage and our generosity and our leadership effectively in the world if everyone buys in. And it's been a long time since everyone has bought in.
Well, Jane, you continue to make major contributions to the discussion, and your book is just the latest. It's called Insanity Defense: Why Our Failure to Confront Hard National Security Problems Makes Us Less Safe. The author, Jane Harman. Thanks, Jane, and congratulations on the book, and thanks for joining us today.
And thanks to the Wilson Center for 10 great years and for supporting my work on this. As I said, most of it happened in the last year, but there were people at the center, especially Meg King and Mary D'Amico, who were indispensable to keeping me on target. And I'm grateful to them. I'm grateful to you. And I'm bullish about the Wilson Center's future. And I'll be there. I am Emerita, after all. I am
That's
not
right.
Vanquished and vanished. And I have superpowers.
There you go.
There they are.
And you would always talk to people leaving the center and remind them of the lyrics to Hotel California, paraphrasing. So you could check out, but you can never leave. So you're still.
Yeah, it's you can come whenever you want, but you can never leave. And the Hotel California is a couple miles from my beach house in California. So I am reminded all the time that's going to apply to you someday too, or maybe you're never leaving. That would be fine too.
Well, an end comes for all of us. Jane, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, John. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of Wilson Center Now and that you'll join us again soon. Until then, for all of us at the center, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for being here.